Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. In my final video of 2023, which I will be leaving linked, we explored a selection of gifts that were exchanged at the court of King Henry VIII for New Year. While doing so, we did come across a couple of references to clocks. In the gift roll for New Year 1534, for example, it is recorded that Henry VIII received 2 clocks, including one that was described as, quote, a book garnished with gold having therein a clock, that was given to the king by Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. And so I suggested that it might be interesting for us to take a deeper look at Tudor timepieces in another dedicated video. And based upon the comment section, lots of you agreed, which I must say I was very pleased about, because to be perfectly honest, I have had some cool timepieces floating around in my brain for a little while now, and I'm very much looking forward to reading your thoughts on them in the Premiere live chat and in the comments beneath this video. And so, without further ado, let's take a look at those timepieces. According to the website of the Seiko Museum, when it came to the British timepiece industry, quote, Britain was behind Germany and France. The team from this museum further explain that the British started to construct tower clocks in churches in the 14th century, but the clocks were actually built by clockmakers called in from Holland. Later, after the 16th century, the pocket watches, room clocks emerging from Britain seemed to be the works of German clockmakers and German techniques. Britain was behind Germany and France in the timepiece industry. Many clockmakers exiled by the French Wars of Religion immigrated to Britain in the late 16th century. The British clockmakers had much to learn from their continental counterparts, but snubbed them out of fear that they would outcompete them in business. Their refusal to warm to their rivals held the British timepiece industry back for many more years. The British lagged behind until a surge of innovation came in the mid-17th century. And certainly, much of this is borne out in the chapter on clock and watchmaking that can be found in A History of the County of Middlesex. In that document, we are told that, quote, the early history of the clock and watch trade in London is very obscure. We are also reminded in this chapter of just how rich a source of contemporary information the Paston letters are. Indeed, perhaps I should make a video on that particular collection of letters. In this case, though, a letter written by Sir John Paston in the spring of 1469 contains mention of him leaving 2 clocks to be repaired by an individual named Harcourt. He is named as being the clockmaker or clockmender of Westminster Abbey. While this in and of itself does not negate the information that's being presented by the Seiko Museum, I do think that it adds additional context, particularly as it fills in the gap between the construction of, quote, tower clocks in churches in the 14th century and the period after the 16th century. This Paston letter that is being quoted in this article shows us that alongside those tower clocks of the 1300s and beyond, there was also clearly an industry for both the production and the mending of smaller timepieces that was present from at least the mid-1400s. And as for the craftsman who is named as being responsible, and also the claims about the nationalities of the majority of individuals who were doing this kind of work in England, well, we can say that the surname Harcourt is apparently English, albeit with Norman origins. Nevertheless, the chapter does state that, quote, some of the most skilled clockmakers employed in England during the 16th century were foreigners. These were men like Nicholas Kratzer, a Munich-born astronomer and maker of scientific instruments, who from 1520 was known as the, quote, deviser of the king's horologies, and Nicholas Oursian, a French clockmaker who was granted letters of denisation in March 1541. And as we can see from this entry in the Letters and Papers Foreign and Domestic for the reign of Henry VIII, Nicholas's name is being connected to Hampton Court, As we will see shortly, he is linked to that palace in more ways than this. But before we start to look at work attributed to Nicholas Oursian, I want to take a look at this fabulous object. It was made for Cardinal Thomas Wolsey at some point between 1518 and 1530, and although it is unsigned, it has been attributed to Nicholas Kratzer. Made of gilt brass and standing at just 100mm tall, this is a polyhedral, meaning multi-sided, portable sundial. This octagonally shaped piece provides space for 9 separate sundials. It was designed with the intention that when positioned correctly, every one of the faces would tell the correct time at the same time when they were hit by the sun. Positioning this item was made much easier through the presence of a now missing compass needle and cover. They once sat in that circular hole that you can see on the very top face. On the base, we see engravings of a cardinal's hat on 2 sides. The arms of York Minster, those are the crossed keys, and the arms of Wolsey himself. Now, we took a close look at these arms in my video that I titled Cardinal Wolsey, Material and the Man, which I will be leaving linked. One of the things that I think I find the most fascinating about this particular item is that its desirability clearly goes beyond simple function. If this were a piece simply meant to tell the time using the sun, then a single face with an inbuilt compass would have been sufficient. But that's not what's happening here. This piece is alluring because of its complexity. I feel like I can almost imagine Wolsey popping this out, showing it off to his friends and rivals at court, maybe even before his king. Owning this was proof that Wolsey was the patron of brilliant thinkers and craftspeople. This was a status symbol of a timepiece, something that those in the know would be able to recognise the value of. It was the Patek Philippe of its day, if you will. I do wonder if Wolsey's interest in timepieces influenced his monarch, or whether it was the other way around. What is for sure is that Henry VIII did accumulate a fair number of timepieces of his own throughout his lifetime. Indeed, he had a sufficient number of clocks that when his final inventory was being made, it was deemed necessary to specify by type of clock. At the time of his death, the king had 11 clock sorts. And this is the one surviving example. It is thought to have been made in Paris by the French royal goldsmith Pierre Mangot in around 1530 to 1535. It is unclear whether Henry VIII purchased this piece himself, or if it was instead a diplomatic gift made to him by Francis I of France, during one of the periods when these two frequently warring kings were actually trying to be friends with each other. From the bottom up of this 30cm tall silver gilt piece, we see clawed feet clutching balls of agate, blue enamel plaques embellished with gilding on each side. These plaques have carved cameos of classical figures in their centres. The clock and its mechanism sit within a rock crystal cylinder. Male nude figures surround the open-work dome, and the whole piece is topped with a hexagonal knop from which pearls dangle, that also has a spread of leaves erupting from the top. Timothy Schroeder explains that this, quote, open calyx of leaves formerly supported a now lost crowning element. The gems that adorn this piece are rubies and garnets. This would be the glittering centrepiece at a Tudor royal banquet, the salt cellar that was also the clock, and no doubt it would be rendered all the more spectacular as it was illuminated by candlelight. The value of salt as a commodity in the Tudor period led to it, and the containers it was housed in, becoming a marker of social status. So much so that where an individual sat in relation to the salt, whether above or below, how close or far away, was dependent upon their place in society. The addition of the clock only serves to further increase the luxury and cost of this item as a table ornament. Perhaps this piece once adorned a table for some great banquet at Hampton Court Palace, and if it did, then it may have found itself in competition to be the most fabulous clock on display, because from around 1540, this astronomical clock was on site. Thought to have been designed by Nicholas Kratzer, who I mentioned towards the start of this video, but made and installed under the direction of the other individual I mentioned, Nicholas Oursian, who became the keeper of the king's clocks. This clock is nearly 3 metres in diameter. It is positioned high up in the central Tudor courtyard of Hampton Court Palace. Henry VIII had this placed where he and his intimates would get the best view and the best use of it. The clock face is made up of 3 copper dials that all rotate at different speeds. The innermost dial shows the phases of the moon and the timing of the moon's southing. This is when it passes the meridian/anti-meridian, which is used to calculate the tides. This was a useful, if not vital, piece of information for those inhabiting a palace on a tidal river like the Thames. This part of the clock allowed individuals to determine whether it was high or low water on the river. This was particularly useful if you had to cross beneath London Bridge. Travelling by river was one of the quickest and indeed safest ways to move across London, to move between London residences, for example. But this was best achieved by having the tide in your favour. The second dial shows the days since the last new moon. The third or outer dial shows the days, the months, and the signs of the zodiac. The pointer with the sun on it indicates which zodiac sign the sun is in, and that information is necessary when predicting the future. These 3 dials are then surrounded by a ring that has been attached to the stonework. This ring has been painted with the 24 hours of the day, which enabled the king and his court to keep an eye on the hour of the day, so that they could ensure that all courtly work and indeed play ran to time. You will also notice that a representation of the Earth sits right in the middle of the middle dial. Thus, it is orbited by both the moon, correctly, and the sun, incorrectly. This is a reminder that this is a pre-Copernican device. Indeed, Nicholas Copernicus would not publish his work arguing in favour of the heliocentric theory until shortly before his death in 1543, and this theory would remain controversial for many years to come. I think that through the examples we have looked at today, we might be able to argue that Tudor timepieces do more than simply let people know the hour. They're also telling stories, shaping narratives about individuals and the society they moved in. And so with this in mind, and before we wrap up, it is unsurprising that these objects also find their way into the art of the period. In Hans Holbein's Ambassadors, we see on the top shelf, between these 2 men, a space filled with scientific equipment. Among these pieces of equipment is a polyhedral dial, similar to the one that was owned by Cardinal Wolsey that we looked at first. This polyhedral dial and the other items on display here represent expensive technical equipment. All of these pieces are a testament to the investment in and understanding of science that these men are laying claim to. Now, I do have a video on this amazing painting that I will be leaving linked. But it doesn't stop there. In my video on Hans Eworth, which I will also leave linked, we looked at this portrait of Mary Neville, Lady Dacre. On the table in front of her, beside the book in which she is writing, we see a golden table clock. This portrait was painted at around the time that Lady Dacre was campaigning to have the lands that were seized from her family following the execution of her husband, who is depicted in the portrait behind her, restored for the benefit of her children. In this suit, she would be successful. The golden clock placed before her is a comment on the status and wealth that she believed to be her family's due, but it is also arguably a symbol of her own time spent patiently enduring the hardships of her widowhood, of her time spent working and waiting for better days to come, both for herself and for her children. There are also numerous metaphorical references to timepieces that can be found in the portraits, poems and plays of this period. In many cases, they are used in relation to the theme of mortality. These timepieces are, in these cases, being used as a subtle form of memento mori, a reminder of the passing of time, of the inescapability of death. There are, in fact, many portrait examples where we find a subject depicted with their hand upon a skull, with a clock either hanging on the wall behind them or placed upon the table in front of them. These painted timepieces are the set dressing that are used to convey the chosen message of the artist and or their patron in these portraits. But I think that the real physical timepieces served a similar function, whether they were in the hands, on the tables, or even affixed to the walls of their Tudor commissioners and owners. But what do you think of the selection of Tudor timepieces that we have looked at today? Did any surprise you? Have you seen any of these in person? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video, but I would also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will help to boost the engagement, and the more engagement a video gets, the more YouTube shares it out, and that will help us to grow this community. As we've been talking about timepieces and clocks, let's do something time-related emoji-wise this time. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some of all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with your friends? And in fact, if you like the channel, let some pals know about it. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now is the time to check to make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you against your will. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear. And that way YouTube claims they will tell you when I've next uploaded and also when I'm next planning to go live, which I do to talk about the history news. And I know you are not going to want to miss that. Of course, now we have got our failsafe. If you head to my website, www.katrinamarchant.com, I will link it. If you head over to the contact page on my website, I'm showing you this on screen now, and you put your email in that little box, and that will add you to my mailing list, and I will email you once a week to let you know what I'm up to and to send you any links that you might need. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.